Your first exam is coming up. How should you study for this exam? Well, let's start by discussing the material that the exam is going to cover. In short, the exam is going to cover everything that we have learned so far. So that means we are going to cover everything that you have learned in the first 4 weeks of the course. In terms of the textbook chapters, we have studied the first 14 chapters, and anything that appears in these 14 chapters may come up on the exam. And we've had 4 lectures so far, lectures 1 to 4, and anything that we talked about in these 4 lectures may also appear on the exam. That's the material that's going to be covered. Now, throughout the last 4 weeks, you acquired a few conceptual skills. And you should be able to explain all of the following. What are necessary truths, falsehoods, and contingent sentences? When are multiple sentences jointly possible or necessarily equivalent? What is a valid argument and what is a sound argument? That was the first batch of concepts that we introduced. Similarly, you should also be able to explain what is a tautology, a contradiction, or a truth-table contingent sentence. When are multiple sentences jointly satisfiable or tautologically equivalent? And when do given premises entail a conclusion? That was the second big batch of concepts that we introduced. And then we discussed the truth functional and other connectives, and you should be able to explain what the difference between these two is. And we discussed the question, why does TFL not contain fewer or more connectives? So these are the main concepts that we have studied and that you should be able to apply. So in particular, you should be able to relate the concepts that we introduced in the very beginning of the course to the concepts that we studied a little further down the road. So for example, you should be able to explain the difference between necessary truth and tautologies, and between necessary falsehoods and contradictions, or the difference between contingent sentences and truth-table contingent sentences. And similarly, you should be able to explain the difference between 2 sentences that are jointly possible and 2 sentences that are jointly satisfiable, or the difference between necessarily equivalent and tautologically equivalent sentences, as well as the difference between valid arguments and tautologically valid arguments. Now, when it comes to truth functionality, we may ask you, for example, to show that a given connective is or is not truth functional. So make sure you know how to do that. And you should also be able to show that a given TFL connective, so for example, the conditional, is redundant, meaning that it can be defined in terms of other connectives. And you should be able to explain why additional connectives would be redundant, and thereby show that TFL is expressively adequate. In addition to these conceptual skills, we also learned how to symbolize English sentences and arguments in TFL. We discussed 5 main steps that this symbolization involves. So you should be able to paraphrase English sentences in TFL, identify the atomic sentences, provide a symbolization key, identify the correct Boolean connectives, and identify the conclusion of an argument. Those are all skills involved in the symbolization of an English sentence or argument in TFL. And then you should also be able to express necessary and sufficient conditions in TFL. The next important skill that we practiced concerns the evaluation of sentences in a given world. So we looked at how you can figure out whether given TFL sentences are true in a given world. So this is an example of an exercise that we may give you on the exam. We may ask you the following 5 sentences, are they true or false in the given world? And then you need to make the right choice. And then finally, we studied and practiced how to construct truth tables and how to use truth tables to assess the logical properties of sentences. So you should be able to construct truth tables for 1 or more sentences, And you should be able to use these truth tables to determine whether given sentences, say, are tautologies or contradictions, or whether multiple sentences are jointly satisfiable. And you should be able to explain the limitations of the truth table method. And you should be able to use partial truth tables in cases where providing a complete truth table would be too difficult or too laborious. Now, how can you practice and acquire all these skills? Well, we offer a few resources. First, you can look at the flashcards and use the flashcards to memorize core concepts. Second, I do recommend to review and redo the practice quizzes, lecture responses, and problem sets. And here I do recommend to not simply look at the answers that you have already given, but try to genuinely do these exercises once again. So just look at the questions and try to provide the answers once again, even though you have done this before, since doing it again helps to hone the skills and really drive the points home. Now, if you look in the textbook, you will see that there are additional textbook exercises in the end of each chapter. So once you have reviewed and redone the exercises that we have done together in class, I recommend to move on to the textbook and do these additional exercises in the end of each chapter. Now, you are not alone in this process. Each one of you has a team, and I do recommend to work with your team and discuss your answers and questions with the other members of your team. In addition to the members of your team, maybe you have made friends in class, people you are sitting next to, so those are also good resources, good people to contact and ask for advice and to clarify questions. And of course, I am also available, and I do encourage you to get in touch if you have any questions at any point.